I would like to move on and introduce you to our keynote speaker, Dr. Peter Ruppert. As many of you know, he is the Executive Director for the University of California at Santa Barbara's Economic Forecast Project. He also teaches courses there. He's done a lot of research with his specializations being in macroeconomics, labor economics, and family economics. We are very privileged that he has been interested and willing to work with us on this concept and this idea, and we welcome the information on Northern Santa Barbara County. So, there are many more things I know that Peter will share with you about himself as he moves through this presentation, so I won't belabor it any longer, and I will happily introduce you to Dr. Peter Ruppert.
So yes, as mentioned by Ron, this is a very hot topic and a controversial one, and I am the professor of economics, and I direct the UCSB Economic Forecast Project. I also, with our Nobel laureate Finn Kidlin, run something called the Laboratory for Aggregate Economics and Finance, and I am the special economic advisor to the Santa Barbara Zoo and Island Brewing Company beer. So what's the idea? The idea that I was asked to do is sort of really open up a dialogue. My first problem was, how do you spell dialogue? I never know if you should put a UE at the end, but everybody says the newer generation doesn't put a UE at the end, so I just put dialogue. We want to talk really about a discussion about production and consumption of energy, all forms of energy. I have a little disclaimer because someone said I should have a disclaimer. So the views expressed here are not necessarily those of UCSB, the UC system, the Federal Reserve System, my family, Santa Barbara Zoo, or Firestone Walker Brewery. I've been known to go there and drink beer, so I don't want you to think that I'm talking for them. But they should be, of course. So I want to talk a little bit about the choices that we have and how we go about thinking about these choices. And the choices we have, I'm going to start out with a little presumption. And my premise is just simply going to be that people are kind of the same. And I know we always tend to think that people aren't kind of the same, but they are kind of the same. What do I mean by that? When we look at what people really want in life and what you ask them for, what they do, they want to be healthy. They want to have a good job. They want a nice, affordable place to live. Pristine, abundant nature. Safe and productive schools. A clean, well-lighted place. Anybody remember that from reading that? It's Ernest Hemingway wrote that. But anyway, and if you look at these things, what's really surprising is that even though everybody wants all of these things, they're the most argued things you can imagine. Healthcare? Come on, it's crazy to talk about healthcare. Jobs, we all talk about inequality, things have happened over time, bad jobs, etc. Affordable housing? Doesn't happen in Santa Barbara County, really. Pristine, abundant nature, that's kind of what we're talking about a little bit here. Everybody wants that. Safe and productive schools. So all of these things end up being stuff that's so controversial, so hard to think about, that it's why these events have to happen. And so what do I think about? So what's our duty? Not just as elected officials, but as the electorate, our voters, everyone. We want to make good choices. And there's only one way to make good choices, by the way, is to understand all of the impacts of the decisions that we make. And by that, I mean we have to think in general equilibrium. I'm going to explain a little bit more about general equilibrium in a second, and you'll get the sense of it. So here are some choices we have to make. How should we produce energy? Right? How much pollution should there be? How much crime should there be? How safe should our cars be? Right? Whom to tax? Whom to subsidize? So let me explain a couple of these things about general equilibrium. People say to me, our cars are getting safer, yet it doesn't seem that so many people they're still dying from car crashes. By the way, we could make cars completely safe, couldn't we? We could make them like tanks, and you drive around and no one would ever get injured. It's too costly. So we're willing to drive around crappy cars, some of us, that aren't so safe because they're cheap. And so people come to me and say, how would you design a safe car? I said, what's the goal? No accidents, no deaths. I've got a solution. So what you do is you put a spear in the steering wheel. And if you touch another car or go over the speed limit, a spear comes out and kills you. How fast are you going to go? You're going to walk, right? You're not going to be driving cars. That's a safe car. Okay, that's a stupid idea, but, you know. So there are lots of ways to make choices and how to do things. It depends what the benefits and the costs are, as always. So here we have to talk about what the benefits are, what the costs are. It turns out, and for many of these things, benefits are pretty easy to measure. We measure things like income. We measure employment. We measure output, taxes, all those things. Pretty easy to measure. How to measure costs. So this is pretty cool. This came out by Morgan Stanley. So Morgan Stanley said, let's think about the increase in electric cars. They kind of say, okay, that's going to be a good thing for us. What's the downside? It turns out the downside is Monster energy drink, 63% of their sales are at gas station convenience stores. So Morgan Stanley is saying, as you increase the number of electric cars, we're going to get rid of convenience stores. We're going to tell you not to buy that stock. That's thinking kind of in general equilibrium. What happens when there are more electric cars? No one would have ever thought. I never thought of that. 63% of their sales are at convenience stores at gas stations. So people don't go to gas stations anymore. Convenience, and so this is a whole big thing about convenience stores. So you can switch back. Minimum wages and crime. So all of us agree that people should have a good living. I have a student working at UCSB. She just graduated, got her PhD. She has a paper on minimum wages and crime. And what she shows is, in that paper, across all the counties in the United States, she looks at what happens when minimum wages go up. There's two effects. The first effect is those people who keep their job get a higher wage, and therefore they're less likely to commit crime. However, there's a disemployment effect. The disemployment effect is some people lose their jobs, and those people that lose their jobs are more likely to commit crime. And what she can calculate is the exact minimum wage for which crime is at a minimum. By the way, it's not zero. We can't get to zero. It's just too hard to get to zero. It's too costly. It's too costly to get to zero pollution as well, and we all know that. Anyway, she comes up with this number, and it turns out, in California today, the minimum wage is kind of right where it should be to minimize crime. When it goes up to $15 an hour, her paper predicts that crime by teens is going to go up in California. Right, so that's the negative side of minimum wages. But again, if you didn't think about through all these things, you'd think, sure, and I'm a proponent of the minimum wage, it should be $1,000 an hour. What's this $10 business? I can't drink coffee on $10 an hour. I mean, for heaven's sakes. But what I want to say here is that future energy scenarios, and all the scenarios I'm going to present today, are basically, a lot of it's based on economics. What's going to happen? And now we're going to have to try to figure out how to weigh those costs. Like I said, the benefits aren't so hard to measure, or what's going to happen isn't so hard to measure. So making good choices begins with the facts. So this is a famous quote, one that I like a lot, by Harry Truman. We have to have strong minds ready to accept the facts as they are. So here's a picture. I show this picture all the time. This is GDP per capita. GDP per capita is the same as income per capita. This is in real terms. This means that we've gotten rid of inflation. What this shows you is, going back to 1800, it's like when you were in 1800, you were living on about $1,200 a year in 1990 dollars. So pretend you're in 1990 living on $1,200. Today, we're up above 30-some thousand in 1990 dollars. We're about 26 times richer than we were in 1800. That's what this means. Every year on average, so I took this into logs, we grow about 2% per year. That is, we get richer by 2% per year. And the reason I like this graph a lot, by the way, is, when you look at it, except for the Great Depression, except for World War II that you can see, everything else is a small wiggle. That means good presidents are small wiggles, and so are bad presidents. This gives me hope in life, right? Technology, all this stuff overcomes most of the things that happen. So everything you see here, these wiggles, they're just small little movements around a long-term trend. Our goal in life, by the way, is to keep that trend going. Why? As we get richer, we can afford to do more things, like have less pollution, for example, have better cars, have better schools. So that's kind of the key. Now, it's good, right? Getting more income, being richer is good. Our incomes are higher, but so too is our consumption of energy. It turns out energy consumption is correlated with income. The higher is your income, the more things you tend to do. And resource technology improves. That graph I showed comes a lot from technological growth, becoming more productive. Right? That's where it comes from. By the way, soon, according to the Department of Energy, and I'll show you these graphs in a second, the US is going to be an energy exporter. All types of energy. We're going to be exporting petroleum, we're going to be exporting natural gas, all kinds of things. Okay, and so this comes from, or also one more little thing there on the next tab. I'm shamelessly stealing, so I'm shamelessly stealing some graphs from the United States Energy Information Administration, Department of Energy. They do these models that are fantastic, and I'll explain the models in a second, and you'll see what's going on. Okay, go back. Command tab. There we go. Okay, so that's where this is coming from. So what is this graph? So I'll switch back and forth. So this graph basically, so what they're doing is the following. Sorry for on that side, but the black line, this line, the black line is their reference. So they're going to have a reference case, and let me explain in most economic models and most models of energy and things like that, what a reference case is. What they do is they basically say, imagine all the laws stay the same as they've always been, and the sunset clauses expire when they're supposed to expire, and GDP growth is 2% a year, and energy prices are going to do what they're going to do. I'm going to show you that in a second. It turns out, and that dashed line at 2017, and now they're going to do a projection. And the projection, they're going to basically say, look, suppose technology in gas and resource technology is high versus low, versus high oil prices versus low oil prices. And what you basically see is that production on the right-hand side is greater than consumption in almost all their scenarios. So what that means is we're going to be producing more and more energy, even if we see low oil prices, even if technology is not so good. If, on the other hand, we get higher than the reference case and oil prices are high, then we're going to move up, and we're going to become even a larger exporter of energy, which many people think is a good thing. Okay, so this is their reference case. And again, this is the Department of Energy. They have, they're not one-sided. They're looking at everything. Really good people work there. Their base case is that the price of petroleum, North Sea Brent oil price is going to be $114 in 2050. So this goes out to 2050 if you can't see it. Their high oil price guess is $229, and their low one is $52. And now they're going to do these, they're going to plug that into the model, and they're going to say what's going to happen. And again, you can see that their assumptions are for both crude oil and natural gas. Now, this is what I mean by all this stuff is economics. So why is it economics? Well, look, if the price of, when you have a high oil price, it's going to turn out that people are going to use less oil, use more natural gas, and that's going to drive up the price of natural gas. So you can look at these things just naturally and think about what it is that these models are trying to give us. Have to stop. Okay, so again, as I said earlier, you can see that in all scenarios, basically, natural gas production on the left-hand side is rising, consumption on the right-hand side is rising, and then you can see all these scenarios. And what this basically tells us is that in almost all cases, as income rises, we're going to consume more energy. There's just no doubt about it. Depending on whether gas prices or oil prices are high or low, is going to affect natural gas. And that's just a normal part of economics. This is what I mean about the US becoming a net energy exporter. Oh, by the way, these slides are from Dr. Linda Capuano. She's the director of the Energy Institute, the information part of the Department of Energy. So you can see up until now, we've been a net importer. You see what happens in 2017. By about 2020, in the reference case, we are balanced. After 2020, we're a net energy exporter. Petroleum, same thing. Petroleum, in the reference case, about 2028, we become a petroleum net exporter. Again, that's going to depend on what the prices are. If oil prices are low, then we're going to be producing less, so we're not going to be an exporter. But in their reference case, we are. So, what happens in these experiments? What's going to go on? Well, it's going to turn out that over time, because we're going to invest more in these technologies, alternative technologies, for example, we're going to change our energy usage, our mix of these things. The largest growth rate, by the way, predicted by the Department of Energy is going to be in natural gas and renewables. That's going to be the largest growth rate. Okay? This is gasoline-powered vehicles stall. As a joke. Not really. Okay, so what does that mean? So here's this picture. And again, there's lots of lines here, but let me explain. So the very top one on the left, that's our consumption in the reference case. And by the way, these are quadrillion British thermal units. It's a lot of British thermal units, isn't it? A quadrillion. Anyway, so you can see what they're predicting, the Department of Energy, that petroleum consumption, energy consumption with petroleum and other liquids is going to be kind of flat, maybe dip a little bit, but it ends up being about the same. The blue line right below it is natural gas. That's a big increaser, and so is renewables. That's the green line. So that's the idea that what the Department of Energy thinks is going to happen going out to 2050. And if you look at consumption by sector, it's electric power that's using the most energy. And you can see residential and commercial is way, way down at the bottom. This is what I meant by what they're going to see in terms of light vehicles. These are light-duty vehicles. These are cars and small trucks. The dark blue at the very bottom, those are gasoline-powered vehicles. These are the facts. As best the Energy Department can tell us, gas-powered vehicles aren't going away by 2050. They're not increasing much, but they're not going away. And again, this is not, what's the biggest grower? Battery electric, that's the top, cars. That's the one that's going to be growing the most, but you can still see it's not going to be the majority of cars. So one of the facts that I want to leave you with from these things is basically that, we're going to be we still need all of these different factors to produce energy for us in all these different arrays. So now I want to turn a little bit to employment and earnings and think about that in terms of some of these models and what's going on. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Department of Labor, comes from the Department of Labor. The Bureau of Labor Statistics are the one that calculates all the jobs in the United States. They're the ones, once a month you see the employment report and the stock market reacts. That's the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They define green goods and service jobs. Jobs in businesses that produce goods and provide services that benefit the environment or conserve natural resources, or as jobs in which workers' duties involve making their establishment's production processes more environmentally friendly or use fewer natural resources. Okay, so that's the Bureau of Labor Statistics definition of green jobs. So, the green jobs, basically, they claim in the US in 2011, there were 3.4 million jobs that were considered green jobs in goods and services. That is 2.6% of all the jobs in the United States were these types of jobs. If you look in California, they showed 360,000 jobs, about 2.5%. By the way, that's the most disaggregated by region that they do. But now if you just kind of think that maybe Santa Barbara County is kind of similar to California. So we could say that that's 2.5% at a minimum would be my guess. That means there's about 5,000 jobs in Santa Barbara County that are considered green goods and service jobs. And if you look in the North County, that would be about 1,800. Okay, so a lot of jobs, are there in terms of these green jobs, both in California and Santa Barbara. Again, we just have to make a guess there because there's no surveys. That's an increase of 5%, and they believe that number is going to be going up by at least 5% per year. They only did this in 2010 and 2011. Why? Remember sequestration? Do you remember that thing? People remember sequestration, what that was? When the government couldn't decide what they wanted to do, they couldn't decide to raise the debt ceiling. And then they came up with this idea they were going to make it so gruesome that if you didn't come up with a way, every department would be cut by 20%. Was that 20%? I can't remember. So they didn't come up with the debt, they didn't do it. And sequestration happened. And a bunch of departments got cut. Well, all of them. So what does that mean? It means that this program, where they tried to calculate this stuff, was kind of a low-level program in their eyes. It never came back. So we only have data for 2 years on green jobs, sadly. You can't see this, but this is what I want to show you here. These are jobs in Santa Barbara by city. If you look at the top, this is ag. And so what you can see in ag, you see this big blue line going across. That's Santa Maria, right? And the next is Carpinteria, and then Santa Ynez Valley. If you look at retail trade, you don't see information, you don't see this long blue line. The point of this chart is to show you basically, by the way, this is a funny one to me. This is Lompoc. 25% of employment is in government in Lompoc. In other places, it's smaller than that. The point here is if you do anything in any of these areas in terms of policy, it's going to affect our local environment much different. That is, if you put in something on ag, it's not really going to affect the city of Santa Barbara that much. It's going to affect up here. You do stuff with information, it's going to affect them differently. So the point here is that we really have to think seriously about the stuff that we put in place and who is it going to affect, because it's not going to affect all of us equally. Okay, so the point here is quite diverse employment patterns across our county, and as I said, policy is going to have different impacts. So where are the jobs? And this is an energy efficiency, by the way. This is for the U.S. as a whole, because we don't really have it disaggregated. What I found quite striking is that almost all the jobs in energy efficiency, that is making things more efficient, it's in appliances. Right? That's where all the jobs are. So if your kids want jobs, I guess you tell them to go work in making appliances better. I don't know. Traditional HVAC, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, just making those more efficient. Appliances, you see all that little Energy Star stuff? That's all about this, right? Efficient lighting. Thanks to Shuji Nakamura at UCSB, who won the Nobel Prize a couple years ago, we now have LED lights. We're able to put LED lights in everything, thanks to Shuji. And buildings. Everything else is much smaller. Fastest growing occupations. This is a guessing game. Any guesses? Fastest growing occupations according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Come on. Bureaucrat? Is that? Let's hear some. What do you got? Healthcare. Solar photovoltaic installers. The fastest growing occupation. It grew by 105% over the last few years. 105%. Next, wind turbine service technicians. These are the fastest growing. It's incredible, right? And then, you were right, this third one is healthcare, home health aides, personal care aides, physician assistants, nurse practitioners, statisticians, who cares? Physical therapists. This one at the bottom, bicycle repairs. I'm a cyclist. By the way, if it were up to me, I would ban all cars, just to let you guys know. I ride my bike. I've only been hit once bad by a car. But wouldn't it be nice just to ride your bike and have no cars around whatsoever? So don't make me in charge, because that's what would happen. Anyway, the point is that these are installers. And by the way, when you look at most of these jobs, it is a short-term kind of thing. They're installers. Now, this is a picture of, oh, I forgot to show you something here, sorry. You can't read this, but this is the median pay by job. Voltaic solar panel installers, they get $39,000 a year. This is the wind turbine technicians, $53,000. This is healthcare, $23,000. Right? So these are not the jobs, the high-paying jobs we think about. yet it's kind of the fastest growing in this sector. Just to give you an idea, this is something that we had in our book this last year from the Forecast Project. This is annual pay in Santa Barbara County, wages. This is average pay for all sectors in the economy in Santa Barbara County. The blue is in the oil and gas sector. It's kind of the highest paying jobs that we have. These are very highly specialized jobs. They're very technical jobs, right? So those are kind of jobs pay, as you can see, 100-some thousand in those types of jobs. So we have to be a little bit careful when we talk about having good jobs, where they are and what's going to be growing. So how do we go about thinking about measuring economic impacts? So I'll tell you how everybody does it, just so that you know. And this is going to come from an example that we did. We did this for the Santa Maria Chamber many years ago from the Forecast Project, but it's the same technique that every economic impact study does. And it's very simple. I mean, no, it's really hard to do. So they use something called input-output tables. What do we know about input-output tables? Vasily Leontiev won the Nobel Prize back in the 40s and 50s for designing input-output tables. What does that mean? It means for every dollar that gets spent, we know where it goes. We know when you go to Home Depot and buy, a new shovel, we know where Home Depot then spends their money. We know where, when you get income, where it goes. And we can trace every penny. And that's what input-output tables do. So what these scenarios are, and there's two techniques, by the way. One's called IMPLAN. So when you see impact studies, you'll see it. One's called IMPLAN, the other one's called RIMS. They're both started by the government. What you do is you go find out from a particular entity. Suppose, for example, Walmart wants to move in. If Walmart wants to move in, they need to do an impact study. Happens all the time. The city makes them do it. What we ask Walmart would be, tell me how much income you're going to be getting. Tell me the revenues. Tell me the taxes. Tell me employment. We're going to tell you all this stuff, and then we're going to see where all the money goes. So what's going to do is there's going to be direct effects, and direct effects are impact from direct spending, in this case by onshore oil and gas, because we have the numbers for them. How much they spend on hiring people, on building, on whatever it is they do. That's called direct. Indirect is the impact on other industries from direct spending by onshore oil and gas. So as Walmart goes and buys some stuff from Home Depot then has to pay employees. And that's like this kind of trickle-down effect. And then finally, there's induced effects in that when you pay people who are working for you money, they then go to restaurants. So all these things occur because Walmart came in or onshore oil and gas was here. So what we did in our survey, we looked at several large producers. We got basically about 80% of all the production in Santa Barbara County. Onshore, all in the north, by the way. Those were some numbers. What we found, basically, was we saw how much production. And then what we found out was, I call this not charitable giving. These are property taxes. Property taxes, basically, were paid, of those companies that we looked at, paid about $20 million in property taxes. Some of the largest property taxpayers in the county were oil and gas. And then what you do is, you do the following thing. You say, okay, the fact that Walmart is here, or this company, these companies, whatever it is, the fact that they're here, they generated 715 employees. That was the employment effect. They generated this much output, $149 million. That was the direct effect. That is their people they hire. The indirect effect is that stuff that they spend on, as I said, and then there's an induced effect. And then you come out with numbers like this. Now, as I said, every study does the same thing. So when you look at impact studies, you'll see exactly this stuff. And most people do see this. And how does it work? The input-output table tells you exactly where this money went. And it kind of makes sense when you think about it. In the oil and gas sector, support activities for oil and gas, that was the most employment. Architectural, engineering, and related services, etc. Physicians and dentists, I told you, the input-output table goes deep, right? The fact that you have more people here now, you got to have another dentist. You have to have more tax preparers. You have to have all kinds of things. That's the point of this sort of economic generation. And this in terms of output, again, sort of the same thing. What I want to point out here is, if you look at drilling oil and gas wells and architectural engineering, many of these things are one-time. They're construction-based. And I'm going to show you another study from Berkeley that did it for alternative energy, by the way. It's the same thing. But as I mentioned, all these studies are roughly the same. And what you end up with is this thing called a multiplier, 1.88. What is the multiplier? The multiplier is for every dollar that Walmart spent, or the oil and gas industry spent, there was an economic output of 1.88. That is, it generated more stuff because you're hiring more people. They need more stuff from Home Depot. Home Depot needs more things, etc. So that's what these input-output tables give you, this multiplier number. And that's kind of the number that everybody uses. I can tell you the range of multipliers. I've seen many of these studies. They go from about 1.2 up to 2, roughly. So AERA, for example, they're considering sort of expanding Cat Canyon. And again, I'm not talking about the costs here. That has to be weighed differently. I'm just going to talk about if you did that same study, looked at the input-output tables, what would you find? Well, you get there, how much they want to spend, how many wells they're going to drill, how many new structures they're going to put on their property, etc. You look at that over like the next 10 years, it's about $345 million in total output, 2,500 jobs. That's the construction part over 10 years. And then there's a useful life of the well. And you look at that over the useful life, and they expect about 30 million in output and stuff like that. So what I'm trying to say is, I'm not saying we should have, oil or not have oil. What I'm saying is, this would be the benefits. From that comes property taxes. Now we have to weigh the costs, like any good decision maker should do. Really nice study. This comes from the Department of Law at UC Berkeley, and this is the net economic impact of various schemes in the Inland Empire. And they come up with a multiplier of, guess what? Like 1.7, whatever the number is. So it's a huge effect in the Inland Empire, And they look at alternative energy, they look at regulations, cap and trade, they do all these various things. It's a really, really nice study. By the way, I put links to all these things, so anybody here can have my slides, and you can go to these links, and you can read all about this stuff. So, like I said, they examine cap and trade, energy efficiency, renewable portfolio standards, distributed solar, you name it. And they give you exact numbers for all those things. What it costs to comply with cap and trade, for example. What it means to have a new building, energy unit that's producing solar, et cetera. Again, they find a net gain, multipliers are the same order. You get job losses from cap and trade, from regulatory burden. And a large portion of the benefits, like I just told you, is from new construction. But the point is, these are big economic impacts. So now, going back to taxes, this is 2014, 2015. These are the top property tax payers in Santa Barbara County. The number one was Veneco. Remember Veneco? Yeah. Next is utility. Next is oil. Next is oil, another utility. Biltmore's up there. That's kind of cool. More petroleum and gas, ERG. How about the next one? Fairway BB Property. Who knows what that is? Ty Warner. That's his house. Yeah, he paid last year. He paid 2 years ago 1.6 million in property tax. If you look on Zillow, his property's worth 160 million, by the way, at 1,000 Channel Islands. Now let's move forward just a year. SpaceX. And then utilities. Biltmore's up there again. Petroleum and gas. Windset Farms is now in. See, we lost Veneco, Brightburn, et cetera. Other people come in, of course, and you can see the total taxes that were paid. And the question is, where do our property taxes go? So again, this is my idea that if we're going to do this, we have to think about the whole thing. So if you lose $4 million, $4.5 million from Veneco, and you lose $3 million or something from Brightburn maybe, 48% of property taxes go to our schools. So what we should do is we should break this down and say things like, look, if you don't want this to be here, how many students are going to be left out? That's kind of the way you want to think about it. No one wants to think about that, by the way. I do this at the university all the time. I'm on the investment committee for the university. And 2 years ago, they got rid of, we couldn't buy tobacco stock. At that time, tobacco stock was growing at like 14% a year. And I wanted to tell the students, maybe that's one less scholarship. I just want you to know the cost of it. I agree with you that we shouldn't be buying the stock. But you should know what the true cost is of doing that. And that's, again, what these things should be. So county general fund loses 24%. Dependent services gets 8%, cities 9%, the former RDA got 6%. So quickly now, a little bit more about taxes. I'm an economist, so you have to learn some economics, which is easy. The law of demand. My view is if economists agree on anything, and there are a few things economists agree on, by the way, the law of demand is one of them. What's the law of demand? When price goes up, quantity demanded goes down. You make something more expensive, people do less of it. Happens all the time. Any industry, you name it. Price goes down, quantity demanded goes up. It's a very simple thing. And very few economists disagree with that. So now we can think, as I mentioned at the very beginning, who should we tax? Whom should we subsidize? So it turns out there's a 30% tax credit on solar energy systems. Really want to get that next one. So this is a fact sheet about, so if you scroll down, but I don't know, maybe it's not easy to do. So this basically is a quick fact sheet about, subsidies to solar energy. It was supposed to last for 3 years, and they increased it 5, then 8, et cetera. So we have a 30% tax on, a subsidy on solar. What does that mean? It means it makes it cheaper for us to invest in solar. That's what it means. That's what price going down means. The quantity demanded will go up, which is a good thing for all of us trying to do that in the environment. Can you switch back? Or go to the next one, Earl, that's fine, yeah. Yeah, just click on the... So then, some guy in January decided to put a tariff on Chinese solar panels. I'm not going to name him. Put a 30% tariff on Chinese solar panels. What does that do? It makes solar panels more expensive. It turns out the Chinese make really cheap, good solar panels. So if you're an environmentalist, what you want to do is tell that person, don't do that kind of thing. That's really bad for things we're trying to do. You're trying to help the employment of solar panel makers in the US, and you're doing that at the expense of our environment? Bad. That's just a bad thing, right? We're not going to be making many more solar panels. We're just not that good at it compared to the Chinese. The best thing we could hope for is the Chinese gave us solar panels, right? That would be the best thing. And then we just install them, right? So anyway, Earl, could you go back to the... Right, so those things kind of offset each other. It's true you get a tax credit for installing solar panels or being an installer, but then it's 30% more expensive. So those kind of policies just don't add up. How much gets spent on subsidies? Well, renewable energy from the federal government, they get about 60% of the subsidies, of the $18.4 billion that the federal government spends on subsidizing energy. Fossil fuels get 25%, energy efficiency gets 15%. So that's where the government's spending their money, your money, on subsidies. That's just another picture of it. This comes from the Congressional Budget Office, and what you can see is the dark blue at the bottom are fossil fuels. That's the amount of subsidy that's going to fossil fuels, and you can see how much it's grown over time in terms of alternative energies. This is renewables. This is energy efficiency. So there, the government has really put a lot of money into that. Supply and demand, well, alternative energy prices continue to fall. So you guys know what the levelized cost of energy is? That's how every person tries to compare across different types of production. So what this does is it says, okay, imagine you're going to build a plant, imagine you're going to do whatever, it's going to last so long, you get capital cost of whatever, and then you calculate the cost, the per megawatt hour cost. This top one is rooftop solar panels. It's quite expensive relative to other things. This dashed line, above the dashed line are renewables, below the dashed line are conventional. So you can see that the costs here, except for solar panels on the roof, the costs are very similar now to providing alternative energy. Used to be very costly. Now it's gone down a lot. This is a subsidized one. The blue line was a normal one, and now with the subsidies, it's much more in line. So that's the point. The price of these things has fallen a lot. So what next? That's what you want to know. This is the best guess. Didn't really fit on here properly. This is the best guess by the Department of Energy, exactly where we're going to be getting our capacity. So where is it? Well, historically, you can see, so the blue, you can't see that. The blue is natural gas. The black is coal. Below zero is we're getting rid of those things. Above zero is we're adding. And what you can see is starting in 2010, we've just gotten rid of coal. So coal pretty much goes away. You can barely see wind in there, by the way. Wind is the green. And at the end of 2050, it's about 50% solar, 50% natural gas. That's where we're going to be in 2050. The best guess of the Department of Energy. So our to-do list, not just today, but forever, we need to come up with a comprehensive plan. We need to think about transportation. We need to think about how to make things more energy efficient. We have to think about the fact that alternative and fossil fuels can coexist. And the Department of Energy says they're going to be there at least till 2050, pretty much coexisting. Again, before we make any decisions, we need to think about the general equilibrium. How any particular policy is going to affect whatever. And we have to think deeply about it. Without thinking deeply, we're going to make these things that we hear about, unintended consequences. I never want to hear those words come out of a politician's mouth. What it means is you didn't think about it. What do you mean unintended? Why don't you think about it and then say it was intended, we just weighed the costs and benefits. Fine with me. But just don't say, oh, we forgot about that. And I know there's some politicians here. But anyway, thanks a lot. That's all I have for now.